Welcome all to Protecting Communities in the Clean Energy Transition. It's a pleasure to be with you. There's been a lot of people who've been a part of making this happen, and we want to thank them for being a part of this. And we'll go through. You'll see a lot of them as presenters and parts of bringing this all together. We are making this available for interpretation in other languages, or at least in Spanish. So if Spanish is your primary language, you'd like to be in this, the interpretation button is at the bottom of your screen, the little globe. I don't know if Liliana, if you could share that real quick, please. So in addition to the interpretation, we do have there will be time hopefully for questions and answers, or at least discussions. We can share as the panelists and such some impact on this. If that's the case, then please ask questions, and you can write them at the bottom of your screen. Again, there's the Q&A. We will try to monitor the chat as well, but just in case we missed that, we'll do the Q&A if there's discussion points, and you can add those along as you go along. And the question that's always asked, and I'll answer it now, but we'll answer it again, is this is being recorded, and we will send this recording out to all registrants, and it can be forwarded to others along with other resources and references we make to in this webinar. So that's the plan for this evening. Again, thank you. It's good to be with you. I didn't introduce myself. My name is Russ Testa, and I work with the Franciscan Friars in the United States. And it's a pleasure to be with you. So we can have, we'll now move to our opening prayer.
Thank you, Russ. So hi, everyone. My name is Shana Han. I'm from the Religious Action Center of Reformed Judaism. I'm the legislative assistant responsible for environmental justice and climate change. It's an honor to be here and to give the opening prayer. So before the prayer, a favorite Talmudic story. Two rabbis once debated which was greater, study or action. Rabbi Akiva argued that study was greater. Rabbi Tarfon argued that action was greater. The other rabbis agreed with Rabbi Akiva. Study is greater because it leads to action. There are many wise people in this virtual Zoom room and on the panel tonight, and it therefore seems appropriate to offer the Jewish blessing that is said upon seeing wise people. So may your wisdom comfort and heal the world in this unprecedented time and lead us toward a brighter future illuminated by justice and compassion. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ruach ha'olam shenatan mecha matom levasar vadam. Blessed are you, eternal God, ruler of the universe, who has imparted wisdom to flesh and blood. And let us say, Amen. Thank you.
Hi, so I wanted to take a few minutes and talk about why we're here this evening, what we are about this evening. For the past year, we as representatives of faith-based organizations have been working on and are excited to see the adoption of policies that many of us advocated for around the clean energy transition. We do, however, have some concerns about how this transition will unfold, as whether the energy transition is done with justice in mind will determine whether it succeeds or fails. Now, the shift to cleaner energy is expected to drive a huge increase in the need for minerals and mining. A World Bank Group report from 2020 noted that production of minerals such as graphite, lithium, and cobalt could increase by nearly 500% by 2050 to meet the growing demand for clean energy technologies. The International Energy Agency has said that a concerted effort to reach the Paris Agreement goals would mean a quadrupling of mineral requirements for clean energy technologies by 2040. So this expected growth in the minerals that are needed for clean energy, unfortunately, will come as it often does, we are concerned at the expense of the environment and of the communities that are around the environment. Because particularly in the United States, there's a growing effort to mine these resources here. There are incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, to facilitate the mining of minerals in the US. It's to bolster jobs here and to reshore supply chains. And that's fine and that's needed. But as I said, we are interested in making sure that this doesn't become, we're not trying to solve the problem of getting carbon out of the atmosphere and building a low carbon economy, but yet turning around and creating the environmental and environmental justice challenges of the 21st century. And so this is why we're here. And this is why this is also important to issues around permitting reform. It's important to get permitting reform right. This current proposal, we believe, would tilt the playing field in favor of harmful mining practices. And things like NEPA and other laws are really a guarantor around mining, because the US has some of the weakest mining laws right now, based on something called the 1872 mining law, the General Mining Law of 1872. So our focus tonight is to bring attention to the issue of mining and what we need to do to make sure that we do it in a just, safe, and equitable way for everyone.
Thanks, Clarence. That was very helpful to kind of help us set the stage. Now I turn to our friend Mary Ann to kind of help us further that stage setting.
Wonderful, thank you. We want to share with you some stories of communities that are experiencing threats from the mining for the minerals needed for this clean energy transition. And so we're first going to go to Nevada and the Paiute and Western Shoshone peoples who are resisting a lithium mine in an area called Thacker Pass, which is very sacred to them. So we have a very brief video that will really give you a sense of the threats that this mining can be to communities.
Sometimes when I feel lost, I look up in the stars and I feel guided. My ancestors have walked this same path, and I want the next generation after that to feel that same way. The land is our identity. By taking the land, you're taking away the people.
We feel that this is a sacred site here. And I tell my children that without Mother Earth, who knows where we would be. And for Lithium Nevada to come in and dig, it would be like cutting your own mother up.
Mass extraction is destroying ecosystems. Not only are we putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, but also almost all the water they use is going to be gone. My fear is that we swap one technology for another and we don't address the underlying concerns, and that in 50 years we're like, oops, that didn't work.
Attack Dagger Pass!
When the colonizers first came over here, we started to see the cycles of assimilation, genocide, stripping the people of their identity, of their land, of their tribal resources. These cycles are continuous. What's going to be the next new thing? Right now, it's lithium.
Mother Earth is all we have.
To take the lithium out of this ground is another form of genocide or cultural genocide.
Our people were massacred there, where the proposed mine is going to take place.
We are Earth protectors for all our relations. That's what we're called to do, to stand up to protect our children and our elders and our way of life.
Lisa, you're muted.
We're going to share a little bit some of the international voices. Much of the mining for the clean energy for batteries comes from outside of the United States. The Congo is the source of 60% of the world's cobalt, which is used in cell phones and electric vehicle batteries. Mining there has brought a deep history of child labor and armed conflict. Cobalt is essential to power the rechargeable lithium batteries used in millions of products sold by Apple, Google, Dell, Microsoft, and Tesla every year. Tonight, we're going to be hearing from a voice from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, from Godefroid Marqueyan. Since it's 1 a.m, he has pre-taped a short video to share a little bit his perspective. Godefroid is from a very small rural village in the Congo. He raised goats when he was a child, but then went on to study and become a teacher and learned about the ravages of mining through his friends and family who were miners. And that led him to really take a stand against the situation of mining, to the point where he was very concerned also about uranium and became the main negotiator, one of the main negotiators, leading to the DRC ratifying the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons this past September 22nd. So we're going to listen to a video that Godefroid taped for us about the impact of mining used for electric vehicles.
I am Marigane Godefroid, coordinator of CADRE, which is a national NGO operating in the Democratic Republic of Congo in Goma, North Kivu province. I'm happy to share with you the negative impact of industrial mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. DRC state strives to put in place legal code and tools to regulate industrial and artisanal mining sectors. It's among other mining tools and codes, mining police and technical services for traceability. Nevertheless, there are negative impacts, including all negative aspects arising from industrial mining exploitation in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They are about environment, social well-being, and national economy. First, environment. Industrial waste are thrown either into rivers or in nature in defiance of environmental standards. Hence, pollution of water, of rivers and lakes used by the population. Unfortunately, the people eat fish and vegetables that are contaminated and therefore harmful to their health. 60% of rivers in Katanga province are polluted by waste from mining industries. Fish from Changalele Lake in Katanga are also contaminated with uranium radiation. Social sector. The social well-being, as far as it's concerned, I've written 5 small points. First, children are born with congenital malformation or defects. Some children of 3 years old are unable to hear, neither to speak. And this is a source of serious concern for their parents. Those congenital malformations are linked to mining activities for parents working in industrial mines. Researches show that some industrial workers in Katanga province are contaminated in their blood cells, which are transmitted to the newborn babies, unfortunately. Lack of enough personal protective equipment in the work site, helmet, boots, goggles, raincoats are missing for industrial workers. Insufficient adequate sanitary infrastructures for workers' health care. This affects their life expectancy, and few of them can reach retirement age. 3, porosity of the mining sector to the detriment of appointed industrialists. Protected illegal operators hinder those who are in order with the state regulations. 4, persistence of many unemployed people with accentuation of poverty in the mining areas following the non-compliance of the system of subcontracting and artisanal mining, which occupied the unemployed population. 5th, conflict with multinationals that subcontracts expatriate services instead of subcontracting with legal entities governed by the Congolese law and with Congolese capital. C, about DRC economy. There are 2 points, but not limited. First, stagnation of the economy of the Democratic Republic of Congo, a mineral producing country, because of very low repatriation of foreign currency versus prosperity of native countries of multinationals, because the bulk of foreign currency from the export of minerals stays at home. 2, very limited access to land for farming, because industrial companies occupy large land concessions and prohibit locals from working the land in state-owned concessions. Therefore, practice of survival agriculture and not for income. So the local population have no access to the state-owned concessions and is therefore unable to produce for market. Thank you very much. I give you the floor if you have few questions for better understanding. Maragande.
So we are very grateful to our speaker from the Democratic Republic of Congo sharing with us the great challenges there. And we know that these are stories that are repeated throughout the world, throughout Asia, Africa, and South and Central America. And we know that very soon there's going to be international climate talks in Egypt. And we hope that this question of justice and environmental sustainability are part of the conversations about how we make this transition. So we're going to share some ideas for advocacy for those of us in the US. And I do see some friends from outside the US. And just so you know, we're going to have some conversation after that around what all of us can be doing and thinking about our lifestyles and ways that we think about use of energy and this transition. So one response we invite you to is to think about advocating in the US for a law that would reform the mining law of 1872 that Clarence mentioned earlier. Just imagine that 150 years ago, there were men with pickaxes who were trying to get gold out of the rock. And now we know there are much more destructive practices of blowing up mountains to get coal and having huge pits that we dig out to get minerals. So we need to have updates to that law to take in that reality, to require having the companies pay the government, the US government, for mining minerals on public land and for cleaning up after they're done with their mining operations. And there's several other provisions as well. I am going to put in the chat so that Russ can then share with everyone else a letter that we invite you all to sign. We are hearing that members of Congress who have introduced the Clean Energy Minerals Reform Act in this Congress are going to reintroduce it in the next Congress, in next year. We currently have 60 groups that have signed on in support of this reform bill. And we would invite any of you to talk to your congregations, your religious orders, your organizations, to invite them to sign on in support of this bill. So when it's reintroduced next year, we have even more groups signed on and can send it to Congress to show much more support. So I'll put that in the chat and Russ will share that with everyone else for those of you who would like to sign. And it'll also be part of the follow-up materials.
Great. Thank you, Marianne.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yush Dauchar, and I am a program assistant for Sustainable Energy and Environment at the Friends Committee on National Legislation. So as interfaith partners on this call, we are united in advocating for the clean energy transition. Recent congressional efforts to accelerate permitting processes for energy projects were not supported by the partners on this call for a range of reasons, stemming from the Mountain Valley Pipeline proposal to concerns over opening the door to more fossil fuel projects. These are the types of proposals that have impacted the lives of frontline communities for decades. We believe that before any future permitting reform is passed, the Environmental Justice for All Act needs to be passed as well. This bill, introduced by Representative Ro Grijalva of Arizona and Representative Donald McEachin of Virginia, would strengthen the 1964 Civil Rights Act to empower persons to sue for intentional discrimination and amend the Clean Air Act to require an analysis of air pollution in surrounding communities before any permits are granted. It would also direct agencies to document the environmental and human health risks borne by populations identified by race, national origin, or income, and to use that information to determine whether their policies have a negative impact on human and environmental health. And last but not least, the bill would authorize funding to invest in local and state organizations, as well as indigenous groups on the front lines of efforts to address the degradation of community health and land due to environmental pollution. In the past, environmental justice communities have struggled to advocate for themselves in court when an injustice tied to an environmentally harmful project would occur. There have, however, also been success stories. One of them can be found in northeastern Minnesota. In the area, there have been efforts to build out a copper sulfide mine, North Met, proposed by the Polymet Mining Corporation. This project would be the first mine to extract copper nickel in the area. It would occupy around 19,000 acres and destroy more than 1,000 acres of wetland and agricultural land sacred to the Chippewa tribal nations. The permitting process of the project concluded in 2019, and in the same year, the Tribal Association of Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior Chippewa filed a lawsuit against the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Environmental Protection Agency over issuing the permit to the Polymet Company. The U.S. District Court in Minnesota in 2021 ruled that EPA had failed to consider the impact of the mine's water permits, as well as notify the Native American nation about a project's impact on water quality as required under the Clean Water Act. The Army Corps consequently suspended the permit, and the EPA determined that pollution resulting from federal wetlands may affect the downstream tribe, and that the Clean Water Act allows not only downstream states, but also authorizes tribes to protect their resources. Finally, in April of 2021, the Minnesota Supreme Court ruled that the indefinite permit did not comply with the state law. Through bills like the Environmental Justice for All Act, we hope to make jurisdictional processes for frontline communities such as the Chippewa tribe in northeastern Minnesota more manageable and accessible. The Environmental Justice for All Act currently has 105 co-sponsors in the House and 13 in the Senate. In the chat, we will be leaving a link to the action alert where you can write to your representatives and urge them to support and pass this historic bill.
Juice. Now I turn to our friend Ed to maybe give us a little bit of thoughts of where else we might think about this from the point of view of we've got the advocacy. What else should we be thinking about as people of faith? You can maybe share a little bit with us, friend Ed.
Amen. Thank you, Russ. And thanks to all the other panelists for bringing your experience and wisdom here. I have to tell Liliana I talk fast, so if I go too fast for translating, just shoot me a note and slow me down, and I will do so. Russ asked me to speak to the personal level here, and you think that would be a given with the faith perspective involved in pretty much everything that we're talking about tonight. In the Roman Catholic tradition, where I'm from, I'm a Roman Catholic priest, a Franciscan friar living in Chicago. We, of course, have Laudato Si, the wonderful encyclical from Pope Francis from 2015. And it, of course, it kind of brought about a tidal wave and changes of thinking among Catholics, and got a lot of Catholics talking about an issue that arguably we should have been talking about more. Even before that, Pope John Paul mentioned the environment and climate change, and Pope Benedict did as well, but it was really with the efforts of Pope Francis that we really started thinking about it, and it became a challenge. And I think Russ can attest this, anybody in the Roman Catholic tradition can attest that Laudato Si soon became something to pray about and something that talked about theological principles in the abstract way up here. And we lost sight of the personal transformation that Pope Francis was calling for. We lost sight very quickly on it. And it became a conversation piece. It became another prayer in our petitionary prayer and our prayers of the faithful celebration of Mass. We pray for a healthy environment, and we do all of these things, but there was no visceral challenge. They do something different about the way you inhabit this world and let your faith guide it. And that's not what Pope Francis was getting at in Laudato Si. He wasn't talking up in the trees. He wasn't talking about broad abstract principles. He was talking about very concrete things. And if you've read the document, and I encourage everybody to read it, he uses the term economy or its cognates 50 times throughout the document. He uses the term consume and its cognates, such as consumption 66 times. He uses the term lifestyle, something as mundane as lifestyle 12 times. So the document is really more about changes we need to make in our lives, not just our prayer lives, not just our faith lives, but in the way we inhabit the world materially. There are a couple messages, I think, if you read between the lines in Laudato Si, are the unsung messages of it. When people gather and talk about it, it's really more about matters of faith and prayer and not necessarily concrete changes in our life. And these messages kind of get diluted in the discussion about it. So I wanted to make sure they're highlighted, and again, encourage you to read the actual encyclical itself if you haven't already. It's a great piece of inspiration. One point that doesn't really come across, and I basically already said it, personal change, personal conversion is indispensable. Conversion in the Catholic tradition, sometimes we say metanoia in the Greek, this constant stepping outside of one's mind, changing oneself. Yeah, it means turning away from sin, but it means so much more than that. And he's really calling for that in this document. There are no scenarios that we have among climate scientists or environmental policy specialists that will portray us getting out of the worst case scenarios of climate change that don't involve changes in the consumption habits in Western developed nations. There's just no way around it. We might think they're going to be technological solutions that will allow us to continue our lifestyles as is, and that's just not possible. And Pope Francis is adamant that we have to consider that the way we live our lives in Western developed nations can't continue as is. Personal ongoing conversion is not just a spiritual matter, it's a material, practical matter of how we're going to live our lives. Systematic change at the very highest levels, institutional changes in the way we adapt energy to our needs, those are all indispensable as well. But we at the very base, at the very ground level, are the consumer demand for all of these things. And unless we change our consumption habits, it's going to be very, very difficult for institutions and certainly systems to change. Second point that I think really comes through in Laudato Si, if you read between the lines, as I say, it's very easy to portray climate catastrophe as an existential threat to humanity. People do that all the time. And there's good reason for that, because it is a very profound threat, one we really haven't experienced before. Even nuclear war was a bit of a different, and continues to be a different sort of threat, triggered by different sorts of events. This is rooted in our lifestyles. It's an existential threat, yes, but really it's a greater threat, I think Pope Francis is trying to say, greater threat to justice. Wealthier nations and the wealthier people in those wealthier nations will weather the storm of climate change. The various scenarios, even the worst case scenarios, don't really portray people like us, even Franciscans under a vow of poverty, don't really portray us suffering heavily for a long time, if at all. Food prices would increase. Weather changes, weather extremes in the seasons would be an inconvenience, but that's nothing like the effects that climate change will have on the dispossessed of the world. And Pope Francis's concern is to not portray us as if we're all in the same boat together. We're in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. Many of us in Western developed nations are in a very, very secure lifeboat that's going to protect us from the worst extremes of climate change. And we have to acknowledge that. And we have to acknowledge that for that very reason, it requires us to change our lifestyles in order to accommodate changes at the systemic and the institutional level. Pope Francis famously says in Laudato Si, the cry of the planet has to be heard as the cry of the poor. The two things are not separable. Poverty and extreme poverty, especially around the world, is intertwined with the ecological damage we do. And the problem is one of justice, not simply an existential threat, but a threat to the impoverished of the world. And we have just a great example, I think, for all of this, from everything we've been discussing so far. The Inflation Reduction Act, unlike the Green New Deal that was proposed by Senators Markey and Representative Ocasio-Cortez a couple of years ago, the IRA is a very, very different beast. We went from really considering changing the structure of the world, changing our habits in the world, how we move around, increased investment in public transportation, changing the way we lay out cities. So walking, bicycling, and something other than automobile traffic would be our main source of transportation. That all kind of fell by the wayside with the IRA. Now we're focused on investing in electric vehicles. So we're taking the same Western consumerist mindset of me in my car, and we're preserving that. And much like we might swap out our old energy inefficient refrigerator for a new one with Energy Star on it, we swap out our gas guzzler for an electric vehicle for a Tesla, and life is good again. We don't change our lifestyle. So I think focusing on what Pope Francis has shared with the world and reading Laudato Si through the lens of environmental justice really hits that point home, really brings the point home. Unless we're willing to change the way we live, our lifestyles in Western developed nations, all of this is going to be for naught. Thank you, Russ.
Thanks, Ed. We now have time for questions and answers or discussion. And do a couple of things here as the semi-moderator of this. I want to start and take the perspective of this, continuing with the question of you, Ed, about, you know, the focus of Pope Francis, and you've followed that very closely. You've studied it, you've shared it a lot with, I know, within our Franciscan communities. Could you talk a little bit also about how that kind of is interacting with the more interfaith dimension that he also is working with on this? Do you have some background on that to kind of talk about how his message is, you know, message for Catholics is a welcoming to others, but he's also listening to others in the process of sharing that? I don't know if there's
he very much indeed. In fact, at the end, I think tonight we're going to share one of the prayers from there, and presumably the non-denominational one. He really did want to appeal across the spectrum of faith in that encyclical, maybe for in a way that no previous papal encyclical has done. He was speaking to the world at large. And I think, if I'm understanding your question, part of the effort is to bring people of no particular faith to the table with us. We have a very particular set of goals and aims and aspirations as people of faith with environmental change, with doing something about it. They don't always mesh with how secular people approach it. Sometimes they do. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to parallel the coordination between faith perspectives and non-faith perspectives. But I think, if I'm understanding your question, Francis is trying to bridge that gap and make, you know, environmental justice the common aim. Justice from a faith perspective has particular implications for those of us coming from a faith perspective. Justice from a secular perspective has different connotations, but there's a great deal of overlap there. And his attempt was to focus attention on the justice aspect of it.
Yeah, I think the other,
that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I think the only piece I'd add to that is just that it is interesting as you start looking at particularly some of the people that Pope Francis is meeting with a little bit closer to when Laudato Si was released. It really was a very interfaith kind of group, and that he really saw that he was how we bring the Catholics to whatever others in many ways have already been doing before we had been doing, at least this publicly. And I think that was kind of an exciting piece to kind of see how we really are in this together from the different perspectives we bring from our different religious traditions. It's an exciting piece. So I would we're open to other questions. We do have with us one of our attendees is no longer here. One of our good friends who's been a part of this with us, Chloe Noel, had raised her hand earlier. I'm not sure if she had something that she wanted to add, particularly from her perspective. She's been with us in a long time in this work. And so, Chloe, I'm going to allow you, if you want to say anything to add to kind of the input some of the pieces as we kind of wait for other questions to come in as well.
Oh, I think it was a mistake that I put my hand up, but I did want to say to everyone that I thought this has been a great presentation. So grateful for the contributions that all the speakers made, and really, really glad to see the faith community really stepping into this really important justice issue for communities. And I'm just, yeah, very grateful to you all.
Thank you. Thanks. We do have a question that given, neither of you can answer this, that you feel, given the justice issues raised by the panelists, is quote unquote clean energy the wrong solution to climate change? As the last presenter mentioned, clean energy can often be a way for us to maintain our current lifestyles with a little less guilt, but no substantial impact on our actual environmental impact. Should we be focused on other non-capital solutions like stopping mining, stopping deforestation, preserving watersheds and forests and other carbon sinks, etc.? I'd welcome anyone who wants to start continuing that discussion of how do we kind of live into this and what does all this do? And Clarence, looks like you unmuted, so go for you first.
Yeah, I'll just say that I think that I don't think it's the wrong solution, but I think it's part of it's not the only solution if there is a quote unquote solution. But I think that the immediate challenge of stopping global warming and getting carbon out of the atmosphere is in front of us. And so I think that that's one part of the solution. And then we have to work along a continuum, because to be frank with you, it's going to take a long time to change human behavior. And I'm an optimist in the long run. I'm a pessimist in the short run, but I think you work with what you can and you do what you can. And right now, we're not going to get everybody to stop driving cars. We're not going to get everyone to stop using refrigerators, but maybe we can ramp down the impact that we're having on the planet, and then maybe keep working at the whole lifestyle challenge. Because I agree with what was said previously that, replacing the internal combustion engine with a battery isn't the ultimate solution. But I think it's, like I said, I think it's part of the process of getting where we want to go in the super long run.
Great. Anyone else want to start kind of with that?
Russ, I'm the exact opposite of Clarence. I'm a pessimist in the long run, and optimist in the short run, yet I agree with everything he just said. It's indispensable. Clean energy is indispensable. We have to move toward a world that doesn't burn fossil fuels, but to just substitute solar or some other renewable form of energy for the same volume, for all the same purposes, for the same lifestyle isn't a solution to the problem, because people folks who don't have access to those luxuries that are powered by our energy, they are going to suffer for it. So it's a combination of things, clean energy, but a rethinking of how do we want to use energy in this world.
And let me just add one more thing to that. We have to keep in mind, particularly as members of the faith community or representing the faith community, there is something called energy poverty out there. And there are, for example, 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa who have no access to electricity. So while we're trying to take this step to get cleaner electricity, there are those out there, the poorest of the poor, who have no access to electricity. And that's part of this transition and this challenge as well.
See that, speaking of our friends, our friend Godfrey has been able to join us from the DRC. He woke up nice and early for us, so he just went away. Oh no, I jinxed him by saying he joined us. Well, hopefully he'll be able to join us back again. He was able to be with us to be a part of that. So if people have questions, though, particularly related to the DRC, we can see if he's able to get back in, we'll be able to ask him some of those questions. One of the other questions we have is the Catholic Church owns, it's kind of a two-part, two questions. The Catholic Church and many churches own vast areas of land. They may be some of the largest landholders on the planet. Are there particular programs anyone knows about that the churches are working on with regards to how they're using their lands. And a second question related to that is looking at the questions of climate refugees and how particularly our religious bodies perhaps either using their resources or not to try to answer and address the folks that people are going to have to basically flee for their lives anyways, as their own localized climates change. So I don't know if anyone has any stories to share or background on that from their experiences as well, any of those types of pieces.
I would just invite if anyone who's joined us today has any responses to that, to put that, I don't know if people can use the chat, Russ.
They should be able to, and also if not, they can,
Or
they can put in the
or they could
Q&A.
raise their hand and ask something
Yeah.
and share something, because there might be some good examples from folks.
Yeah. It looks like with Rita's back. So if anybody has any questions for him, that'd be great. And while we waive those questions, somebody asked the questions. In particular, has anyone had any particular success or working with approaches of this issue with youth? That it seemed to be, this person shares, they're keen to save the environment. Sometimes they're unwilling to make lifestyle changes. So kind of that challenge, and I think it probably could be applied to lots of people besides just the youth, but how do we look at folks and address that kind of dynamic? And if people have had any luck in that or success in thinking about that. So use?
Or can I go?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I can give a note here. I think, no matter whether you speak to youth or older folks, I think we all need to always frame the issue of climate change or global warming, whatever you want to call it, as something that's cross-boundary. It's something that doesn't impact our lives right now only, but will have long-term effects on generations to come. And it's not, I think, we partners on this call tend to think of climate as something that concerns us all. And clean water, clean air is something that we all desire. And at the end of the day, something we all want to work collectively towards. So really making this distinction that, climate change is a cross-boundary, is a collective issue, is something that I would highlight here, no matter who we're talking to.
Great. Thanks. I'm going to ask this question. I'm specifically going to start with you. I'm going to say your name wrong. I'm sorry, Goldfried. But how do we see the answers to this questions around quote unquote clean energy or around the response to this as a climate crisis? How, with your experience in the mining industries in the Democratic Republic of Congo, how do you suggest we kind of start talking about this transition while also respecting kind of the nature of not destroying people's lives in the mining process? I don't know if you understood my question or heard me. Others could also answer that question as far as what is the kind of solution to clean energy if mining for battery materials causes problems? Clarence, you started talking a little bit about some of the permitting reform and such like that. What would that good permitting reform be? What are some solutions to that? Marianne, you could also maybe, why don't you start though, Marianne, because you would say something.
Yeah, I think that Clarence named it very well, that yes, the clean energy is needed and it's not enough. And I think there are some things we can be talking about, like recycling. Like, can we find processes for recycling batteries, recycling minerals? So we don't have to do more mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo or in Nevada or in Argentina and Chile. There's also conversations around, can we get some of these minerals from the processes, from other mining processes? So is there waste that comes out of areas we're already mining that we could use to get minerals rather than have new mining elsewhere? And then, of course, there's a whole conversation about how do we invest more in public transportation so we all don't have to be riding around in our own cars. And I would be curious if Godfrey, if you have any suggestions, from your context of what alternatives we can think about for addressing the climate crisis that isn't solely let's mine a lot so we can have electric vehicles. What other ways can we think about addressing the climate crisis that doesn't harm communities such as yours?
Hello?
Yeah, maybe his audio isn't very good.
While we're waiting, I'll just throw in an ad that someone asked about the amount of employment that mining in the DRC, and it's diamond mining employs around 1 million people, and there are thousands of others in cobalt mining and so forth. I think it fluctuates, but in addition to the mining that takes place in the DRC that will come with clean energy transition, we have to keep in mind the mining that goes on there for other minerals that go into cell phones and laptops and, and the gold, the artisanal gold that's mined there. And so this is a long running problem. And I think that the concern is to make sure that the mining for clean energy doesn't double down and perpetuate this issue.
And I guess kind of there's a question, I guess, maybe kind of continuing that, Clarence, and if anyone wants to, and Godfrey, if you could, is there a way that mining can be done safely environmentally is one of the questions. Is there a way to do mining that doesn't destroy too much? I don't know where the balance is. I mean, I don't know how to answer that or how to even ask the question, but the question is, can mining be done safely environmentally was the question. So it's a good question.
Yeah, I would say that part of it is making sure that we have very strong regulations so that there's very clear limits that we're not as the destruction that we're going to do. And also making sure that there's strong consultation processes that communities that are located in or near where we're going to do mining have a voice and are given even given the opportunity to say no, we don't want mining. We don't usually go quite that far. We're going to get them to talk to us. We're going to ask for their input, but the government's going to decide we're going to mine no matter what they say. The other thing I would say is I see my friend Ana Sufi from Argentina is here, and she often talks about minimal mining. Like, how do we think about only doing the minimum amount of mining that's needed for really the needs of our communities? So I think that's a concept we all could be thinking some more about as well.
Go ahead.
Just to snake in there, Russ, it's also worth noting that the mining industry does not run on batteries or solar power. The mining industry has a carbon footprint that's enormous, and it will be for the foreseeable future. So any industrial process we employ to make the requirements for clean energy itself has a tremendous carbon footprint.
Godfrey, you were trying to raise your hand and say something? Seems to be having a problem connecting there. So
Just want to say, you might, Russ, I've had the privilege of being in contact with Godefroy preparing for this webinar. It's 1 a.m. in the Congo, but being in contact with him and seeing his incredible commitment to his community through, 40, 50 years of standing up for the rights of his people and the what's happening with this mining, it's just reminded me that this struggle, we really need each other. And it's really, it's not that hard for us to get online or send a letter, but the sacrifice that people who are in mining communities, such as the DRC are making. And so getting gratitude for all he's given of his time and effort through the years and joining us, and just the inspiration he's been to me personally. Thank you.
I think Shana was going to respond to the question about refugees.
Yes.
Thanks, Marianne. Happy to. I appreciate that question. I think there also, and I apologize for not answering earlier, remember too that it's not only international climate refugees, right? I was just double checking my sources, but within the last 3 to 5 years, there actually are American climate refugees. A number of the first climate refugees in the United States were given federal funding to relocate because their island, Isle de Jean Charles, off the coast of New Orleans, it's projected to sink due to increased sea level rise and to flooding. And the whole city of Newtook, Alaska, they're relocating because climate change has made their community unlivable. So it's not only, we do see the effects abroad. Yes, the many climate refugees that there's hunger, famines in in Madagascar, partially spurred by climate change. There are other problems, I think, in Malawi was one of them a number of years back, where it raises a gender equity issue of girls getting married before they're ready because their families cannot feed them due to climate change. So it really is not only international, but domestic as well. That being said, it's also a question of equity. So refugees are already incredibly vulnerable, and climate change only makes it worse. And then we also have to account for wealthier nations like the United States and others who have modernized and used a great deal of fossil fuels and other polluting greenhouse gas emissions. What do we owe ourselves, and what do we owe to these vulnerable communities with climate refugees who are being hurt first and worst by our choices?
Thanks, Shana. We're getting near the end of our time, but I've got one comment that seems really important, that's important to read, and then also I've got one question. So I'll ask the question, and one of you all can figure out who wants to answer this. The question is, they've read that a potential source of conflict may be dense mineral lumps strewn in huge numbers across the deep ocean floor, lithium, cobalt, and copper. Can someone speak to that? So one of you can think about that. And I'm going to read this other comment that I think is also an important thing for us to think about as religious communities, religious groups, religious organizations. And Karen shares, please consider perhaps remote. There are large numbers of faith-based organizations operating in the world where church representatives literally know the people involved. Can they help establish a process of relocating people to nations where they are needed? The United Nations has a division to assist relocation. Can faith-based systems begin to help move those who farm as organic experts to areas in Europe and the USA, where we also need their people and their skills? And so it's a question of kind of a challenge to us, I think, as religious communities, to look at how can we maybe perhaps look at what is our role to kind of do what you're talking about, Shana, kind of how do we play that role of helping to be people in that transition? So.
With regard to that question about mining the ocean floor, that's something that's really in its nascent stages in terms of a technology and really needs to be considered wisely and thought out. There are international treaties, the Law of the Sea Treaty, that I think governs it, but it's that's something that we all should approach with, we hope governments and everyone approaches that with caution, because we're not very good at mining above the seas. So let's maybe get that right first.
Mary Ann, any final thoughts there?
Yeah, if I could just say, all these questions about is clean energy the solution? And again, Ana Sufi from Argentina just put in the chat, and I think it's really important that we need to be questioning the underlying systems. So for instance, she asks, can energy solutions be sought if we do not question the market-centered capitalist system? And, it's very hard to think about how do we do things differently if we're working in this framework of capitalism, of colonialism, of racism. And so we need to look at those intersections, I think, to really get at that. And that's a whole other webinar, but I do think that it's an important question maybe to leave us with, what are the systems that are propping up this destruction? And climate change is just one of the symptoms, but it's all these underlying structures that are holding it up that we also need to address.
Great. Well, I want to again thank everyone for being a part of this. We're going to close with prayer in a second here. But I want to thank the panelists, all of you folks who brought so much to this. We're sorry that our friend from the DRC, we couldn't get the sound to work somehow with this, to get him to be able to respond to us as well and be able to share the joys of technology when it works, and sometimes when it doesn't. Again, we thank everybody for their time, and I invite you all to kind of, as we now maybe end with prayer. And we're going to use the prayer that Pope Francis put at the end of Laudato Si', written for everyone. It was written as an interfaith prayer. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love. We may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as sisters and brothers, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned, forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey upon it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace.
Amen.
Again, I thank everyone who've been able to be part of this with us. We will be sending out the recordings and all pieces of this in the next day or so, with also all the links to action and other ways of getting in touch with us. So we thank you, everybody, for being a part of this and for helping us to continue this journey together as we try to figure out how to live our lives into the way to make the world a sustainable place for all persons and all things. Thank you much.